it came down to honoring the promise I made to myself and what it represents to me. Most people choose hobbies based on what seems fun or what's cool or what's popular at the time, but not all hobbies are created equal. Some are going to actually improve your life and others are going to worsen your life. And the difference is that certain hobbies are high leverage and other hobbies are low leverage, and your life depends on being able to distinguish the two. And don't worry, we're going to bring this all the way back to cars full circle, but to understand that, we first need to understand the hobby trap. And here's how the hobby trap goes. This was actually me in medical school. I was sick and tired of these Gillette 4 or 5 blade cartridges giving me skin irritation. So I found the Wicked Edge subreddit that was all about doing the old school method of shaving, wet shaving, the safety razor, the double edge, or even a straight razor as a tried and true superior method versus the modern multi-razor cartridges. And you start out on the FAQ or the Start Here guide in a subreddit, and you learn the basics. You learn about getting a brush and getting a proper razor and which blades you need to use and how do you lather the soap and what's the technique. And it's fun. You're learning. You're buying a $12 boar brush because you can't afford Badger, right? So you get a cheap boar brush from Amazon and you get whatever soap is recommended and a mild razor to begin and maybe some Astra blades or whatever else you want to try. And then eventually, once you get used to the basics, you move over to the main subreddit and you see the daily posts and the discussion. And it's usually not about enjoying the process or improving your technique. It's about buying the next best thing. And here I am with my one razor and my one brush, and I'm just trying to hone my craft. But I realized that a lot of the chatter in the group is about upgrade-itis. They feel the need to constantly be buying more and trying new things. One guy has 25 razors and 20 different brushes. And at that point I realized by me hanging out in this area and frequenting it, I would just be surrounded by these people that would motivate me to also want to buy more, purchase more. And that's not really what I want to do, especially when it comes to something as simple as shaving. Some people find enjoyment there. I found it as a means to an end. I need to shave, let me do it in the best way possible, and then I'm going to remove myself from the situation. Same thing with watches. I also got into watches when I was in med school, but it's not really a good time because that's when you are extremely broke. So I got a $40 Casio Edifice that was like the poor man's knockoff of a Speedmaster. And I got a $150 Seiko chronograph SNDD87, which I actually still love and I still wear to this day. You'll see in some of my videos. It's a quartz chronograph with I think a 1/20th second subdial. And I remember telling myself that once I finished plastic surgery residency, I would buy myself an Omega Speedmaster. And that would have been, I think, 2 years ago from today. Mid-2023, because plastic surgery residency after med school is 6 years. But for those who don't know, I actually left plastic surgery residency to focus on various businesses I've been working on. And the funny thing is that even though my businesses now are like 8-figure businesses, when it came time to buy that watch, June 2023, I was like, well, shit, man. This is now more than double the price of what it was back when I was in med school. I don't know if it's really worth it. It's just a watch. It tells the time. Like, what's the big deal? And it came down to honoring the promise I made to myself and what it represents to me. Every time I look at this watch, it's the reminder to bet on myself. Because guess what? You take the risks, you put in the work, things can work out if you believe in yourself. So then I started getting back into the watches subreddit. And then all of a sudden, I was no longer just happy with my Speedmaster, and I started buying more watches. I got a Shunbun, the Grand Seiko SGBA 443 that I actually went to Tokyo and bought, and it was a great experience. I got a Rolex Submariner. I got all these different watches because constantly being surrounded by that energy, that consumerism on the various watch subreddits made me feel like I needed to get more, needed to get the next best thing. So I've removed myself from that subreddit, and now my watch purchasing velocity is a lot lower as a result. And the last one I'll tell you is audiophile gear. So I got these Sennheiser HD600 headphones many years ago, and I absolutely love them. You pair them with a good DAC and amp, and the sound, like, you will enjoy music in ways that you'll appreciate the same songs even that you've heard hundreds or thousands of times and notice new details that you never noticed before. They are incredible. But then I was like, hey, these are only like $300 Sennheiser. Like, they now have the HD800, and they have these more expensive, greater than $1,000 headphones. And when I would go try them on, I was like, huh, like, these are good, but I don't know if they're that much better, really. And again, I had to remove myself from the communities in these hobbies because it just kept pushing me subconsciously, right, to want to purchase more. And when you remove yourself from those hobbies, because you are very much shaped by the media you consume, the people you associate with, then magically, my mind is then occupied on other things instead. Maybe it's becoming a better driver, which we'll get to shortly. But the pattern you'll notice is that in a lot of these communities that are surrounded around purchasing items related to that hobby, if you go deeper and deeper into the hobby, you start surrounding yourself with people on various online communities like subreddits, it becomes about buying more, buying better, buying new. And I don't think that's the right way to approach these hobbies. Because here's the thing, whether you like it or not, as humans, we are social status-seeking machines. But the thing is that each of us can decide what we want to choose in terms of our social hierarchy. So for a lot of people, it's money. For some people, it's fitness or strength, powerlifters, right? For others, maybe it's how good they are on StarCraft because they want to be nationally ranked. So you choose something, you choose a ladder, and you measure yourself against others based on that ladder. When you're going deep into these hobbies, you're pushing yourself into a situation where now the ladder is how committed are you to this hobby? How much do you spend? What kind of equipment do you have? So if these consumerist focused hobbies are low leverage hobbies, how do you define a high leverage activity or high leverage hobby? And there's actually 5 different aspects. The first is that it has to create value internally. So what are you learning as a result of that hobby? Is it building your confidence, your attention to detail, your discipline? For example, with exercise, you generally have to be disciplined. You have to be focused to make progress. Number 2, it needs to produce value externally. So maybe it's creating relationships or money or content, etc. Number 3, it needs to cascade into multiple areas of your life. So going back to exercise, it's going to improve your mental performance, it's going to improve your dating life, it's going to give you more energy and more focus. Number 4, it can be improved or mastered. There needs to be a skill progression involved with the hobby. Like if you're involved with driving cars on the track, then there's a clear progression that you can even measure with lap times as to how fast you're getting on the track. What techniques are you learning? Do you know how to correct for oversteer? Do you know how to trail brake, etc.? And number 5, it needs to create assets or open doors. As an example, when I've created content, it's allowed me to get into business opportunities, investing opportunities that I otherwise wouldn't. Now, you're obviously going to be drawn to hobbies that you enjoy doing for the sake of doing them. These are autotelic activities. That's just a fancy way of saying autotelic, meaning it's an end in and of itself. It is not a means to an end. You don't go to a job you don't like to then make money. You're doing the thing. You're playing the video game because you like just playing the video game. In contrast, going to that job you don't like would be an exotelic activity, meaning that it is a means to an end. So the game is choosing those autotelic activities that you intrinsically enjoy just for doing them, that are high leverage, that hit as many of these 5 criteria as possible. It's not going to hit all of them necessarily, but as many as possible. The first, and I would argue highest leverage hobby that anyone can have, is some form of exercise. And let's go through each of those for exercise. So number 1, is it intrinsically rewarding? I would argue yes, you just have to choose the right kind of exercise for you. For me, that is strength training in the gym, as well as cycling. And I think a lot of car enthusiasts would actually really enjoy cycling if they gave it a shot, because a lot of the things that you learn about driving and weight transfer and lines and stuff like that apply as well to cycling. The only downside is that you are the engine. You can't just get a V8 or whatever. If you are out of shape, your engine sucks. You got to work really hard to upgrade that engine. It creates internal value, right? The discipline, the release of BDNF, that's brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is neuroprotective and helps you with your cognitive performance. It impacts multiple areas of your life. It's a skill that can be improved or mastered, whether that's cycling, strength training. There are not just the techniques, but the performance, right? The strength you have, the VO2 max you have on the bike. And then of course, it's gonna open doors. Now, people who are more attractive, people who are in better shape, they're gonna be more likely to get promotions. They're gonna be more likely to get a job. That's just human nature. We like people that are attractive. It indicates health. It indicates other positive qualities. It's an honest indicator, an honest signal is what they call it. Meaning that you can't really fake it. You can be super rich, but let's say you just won the lottery. You can't just go to the store and say, hey, give me a 6-pack and 10% body fat and make me jacked AF. I mean, you can do that with some steroids and such, and Ozempic is perhaps one of those drugs that's also going to help you lose body fat, which is maybe why a lot of fit people don't want you to take Ozempic, and they say, hey, this is an honest signal that's now being corrupted. But anyways, generally speaking, being in shape is an honest signal about other qualities. You need to have discipline, you need to have consistency, you need to have all these other things in order to be fit. Another hobby that is very high leverage that has been one of my favorites is actually YouTube. So I started my first YouTube channel, Med School Insiders, back at the end of 2016. So I've been doing it now for about 8.5 years, and it has opened up so many doors. It has allowed me to build multiple businesses. It has allowed me to walk away from plastic surgery as a career to focus on these other opportunities. It has given me many friendships. I mean tons and tons of people from reviewing their cars on this channel, and a handful of them, we become friends and we hang out and we text all the time. And we go to the track together, etc., etc. Including some of the boys joining me today. We got a 991.2 GT3 driven by Peter, and another Lotus Emira spec just like mine, just in different colors, driven by Andrew. It's also given me the opportunity to get involved in certain business or investing opportunities that I simply wouldn't have otherwise had access to, simply because people wouldn't know about me or what I'm about. But I've been involved in a couple of these opportunities that have been fantastic. One of these companies, I worked with these guys for about a year, and then after a year, they got accepted into Y Combinator, the world's premier accelerator for startups. And I learned a lot in the process. I, of course, invested in the company as well. Who knows, maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't, but at the very least, I'm learning so much through this process. Now let's bring it back to cars. How can you approach cars in a high leverage way versus a low leverage way? Let's first talk about what is a low leverage way of enjoying cars. I'd say buying expensive cars just to flex is low leverage. I'd say always focusing on buying the next best thing is low leverage. I'd say that focusing on impressing others or buying cars at market because you want to be the first person to get access to that car is low leverage. When there is consumption without any form of evolution or skill development, that is low leverage. But on the other hand, there are many ways to approach cars in a high leverage way. Maybe you enjoy working and wrenching on your own cars, which is something that I've done for years out of necessity from wanting to save money, but now I no longer do that. But if you do, I respect you for it because you're building a skill set. You're now learning how to do things on cars. I now know how to do brake rotors and brake pads and simple stuff. I never did the complex things I always took to the shop. But just being able to do those things or install seat lowering brackets on a Miata, I'm learning about engineering and mechanical components and how to work on a car in a less frustrating way, which sometimes in the moment it is very frustrating and much more time consuming than you expect. One of the highest leverage ways of enjoying cars is trying to improve your driver skill, which means getting better at, first of all, learning how to drive stick shift and understanding how to rev match and heel toe and double clutch. And if you guys want help with that, a full tutorial is coming soon as an update, taking it to autocross and to the track as well, where you can push the car safely to the limit, right? Because you're not going to do 10/10ths driving, or at least you shouldn't be doing 10/10ths driving when you're on the streets. But there are so many additional benefits when you approach cars in the right way. You're going to learn mechanical sympathy. You're going to become a better driver, not just on the track and get faster lap times, but even on street. The people who are the best on track tend to be the best drivers on street too, because they know, okay, let me look far ahead. I'm not going to look just at the bumper in the car in front of me. I got to look way far ahead. You also understand the limits of cars. I started driving slower on the streets, at least when I'm in traffic on the highway around other cars, because I know what a car can and cannot do. And if these unpredictable people around me are going to do X, Y, or Z, then we're going to have an accident. So you understand the limits more. When you see the person who's bombing the highway, who's weaving, who's acting like a tool, it's normally because they don't actually understand the limits of a car. They don't know how to approach, oversteer, understeer, braking limits, threshold braking, and they're gonna get into a hairy situation sooner or later. And while YouTube for me has been the fuel on the fire, the force multiplier, you can still get a lot of these benefits, almost all of these benefits without that. It just makes things a little bit easier in the sense that I'm actually meeting like-minded people, building these great relationships, becoming a better driver, and focusing on the craft of improving my driver skill. Cars become a tool for growth and not just a toy that serves your ego. And I mean, I could easily buy a 991 or 992 GT3, but the reason I don't is not because I don't think they're phenomenal cars. I actually really love the 991.2 GT3. My buddy has one right back there. The reason is I wouldn't be able to enjoy the car in the way that I would want. I could drive it on the street, I could drive it around town, sure. But to take it to track, to ensure a $200,000 car every time you go out on track, and the consumables and the stress and the worry, I'm not there yet. And maybe other people in my shoes would be like, oh yeah, you know, it's not a big deal. And maybe they have a higher risk tolerance or whatever it is. But for me, I'm like, you know what, I'm just not ready for that yet. And I'm gonna track my Miata mostly, I'm gonna track my Emira occasionally. And that's okay. I don't have to impress anyone by driving a Porsche GT car, right? Now the last point is to keep going beyond 80%. Don't stop at 80% because so many of us, it's a very common concept, the Pareto principle, right? If you're in self-development or just optimization, the Pareto principle states that 80% of the outputs come from 20% of the effort. And once you reach 80%, a lot of people stop because that's when your easy gains start slowing down. You start plateauing and you feel like, hey, I'm good enough. I'm 80% there. I should now use my time and effort, take that 20% and put it somewhere else. Because now I've put another 20% that got me that first 80. The next 20% is only going to give me another 5. It's not going to be much more. Your rate of improvement starts slowing down. But what people don't realize is that true compounding, true exponential returns come after the 80%. Because when you go after the 80%, now you're pursuing a level of mastery, and that mastery builds skill, it builds autonomy, it builds trust, such that you're now having opportunities come your way that otherwise never would have when you were at 80%. You enter rarer air. There are fewer people at your level, and you earn this credibility that you can't just buy, you have to earn the hard way. An example of this would actually be with fitness. So let's say you're a teenager, you're getting into the gym, and you go harder than the average person, you get more into it, you go full on to bodybuilding, you start competing, and now you're competing in your local shows, and maybe you win a local show, and you start, with this wind in your sail, you start pushing harder, and you start competing nationally, and maybe you start winning bigger shows, and now you have sponsors coming. And if you stopped at 80%, if you stopped at your local show, you wouldn't have all these benefits. But now, because you've been pushing yourself harder and focusing on mastery and trying to become one of the best in the world, all these other opportunities exponentially come your way. Not just the personal relationships, but the professional opportunities, the business opportunities, and so on. So what I want you guys to do is to design a leverage-driven life. And what that means is you need to audit your current hobbies. Are they building you, or are they just costing you? Double down on the ones that bring you joy, they make you better, and they create future opportunity. Pick the hobbies that move the needle, not just your mood. Because remember, the right hobby doesn't just make you happy, it adds value to all aspects of your life.